Coming up, Kirby Smart explains why a Georgia linebacker is still practicing despite the fact that some say he's violated terms of his probation. We'll give it all to you next right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to AT&T SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is Mike Johnson. We are glad to have you with us as we are in a very busy week here. Early signing period for college football recruiting begins on Wednesday. Obviously, bowl preparation is still continuing for Alabama, Georgia in the college football playoff, a lot of the other SEC teams as well. We're going to cram as much as that can be crammed into a week's worth of conversation here.
Yeah, nobody knows what to expect either. I guess all these programs getting ready to see what kind of commits that Santa brings midweek this week on Wednesday.
So we'll deal with all of that. Let's start the show the way we always do by reminding you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's begin the show with item number one on our list here on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10. As we said, Natrez Patrick, kind of an interesting situation. This is a Georgia starter at linebacker, but the night of the SEC Championship game was arrested in a car with the Georgia wide receiver Jason Stanley. Last week, though, Patrick had his charges dropped. This is significant because based on longstanding University of Georgia policy, that third violation involving marijuana, which it was for Patrick, could have ended his Georgia career. But the charges get dropped. Then we find out that they may have been a probation violation going on back to an arrest that he had months before in Athens, Clarke County. A lot to make your head spin here, especially if you're Georgia coach Kirby Smart, who today, when he met with the media as part of his Rose Bowl press conference, explained the fact that for now, Patrick and Jason Stanley both still on the team and currently still practicing. Here's Kirby Smart.
As I'm sure most of you guys are aware, and everybody wants to know and talk about the Natrez and Jason Stanley situation under University and Athletic Association policies. Both those guys remain part of the team and eligible to practice. And as we always talk about, disciplinary matters, they're handled internally. So we make disciplinary decisions based on our policies, and the September revisions to the substance abuse policy had no impact whatsoever on the situation. So we're following our policies without any exceptions and without regard to the players involved or where we are in the season. And the Athens Clarke County situation, with Natrez is a separate matter, and we'll address it according to our policies once it's resolved.
A lot to keep up with here. You can be forgiven if you don't understand all of it, but Georgia administered a drug test to Patrick after the arrest in early December for the SEC Championship game, the night of that. That's a drug test that he passed, and yet there's apparently a drug test administered by Athens, Clarke County. That's the county where the University of Georgia is located, in which allegedly Patrick did not pass based on a report at DogNation.com. But Patrick's attorney has kind of weighed in on that probation issue in Athens, Clarke County, which Smart referred to at the end of his statement there. And he says, this is Billy Heelan, the lawyer for Natrez Patrick, that a probation violation is not a violation of the UGA Athletic Association substance abuse policy. This is true under the previous policy and under the policy enacted on September the 1st, 2017. As the University of Georgia Athletic Association required to follow this policy, Natrez Patrick should remain a member of the University of Georgia football team. Now, it's important to remember that Heelan, the attorney here, works for Patrick, so he's obviously going to argue what's in Patrick's best interest here. But what do you make of this situation that Patrick was arrested for a third time? Even though those charges got dropped, he's still practicing, and because of the fact that this Athens Clarke County situation won't be resolved until after January the 1st, he can move and play in Georgia's Rose Bowl game and potentially national championship game before this is resolved. What do you make of what's going on here?
There's a lot of avenues to take at this one, isn't there? There's a ton of twists and turns in the storyline, a lot of things to follow. You have to follow, drug tests, the arrest, what Kirby Smart's doing, what Natrez Patrick's doing, everything that kind of lines up to kind of tell this story. There's so many different angles to kind of give your thoughts on it. And to me, I look at it from the player's perspective. I look at it from what would I do if I was a teammate of Natrez Patrick. I don't know if I'd want him on the field. I know that there's a lot of people out there that say, well, this happened and the charges were dropped and this happened. Listen, I don't want a guy like that on the field with me. I think he should stay in the program, but I'm telling you right now, until you can count on the guy to not go out and do something stupid, it goes back to Antonio Callaway. Mm-hmm. How many times we talk about Antonio Callaway? He's going to keep doing dumb things. Now, do I think he should stay in the program? Absolutely, because if a guy's got a drug problem, the worst thing you need to do is take the shackles off him and send him somewhere else. Send him somewhere to get help right now. Say, you know what, you can get back with us in the spring if you want to, but you will not be playing in Pasadena. If I'm Kirby Smart, if I'm the team, the players on this team right now, I don't know that I want to line up next to the guy.
So I think there are two issues at play here. There's the one of, is Natrez Patrick supposed to be playing in the Rose Bowl? Will he play in the Rose Bowl? There's also the issue from the Georgia fan perspective of what has been viewed as a heavily restrictive policy against things like marijuana, which is what Natrez Patrick has been dealing with at Georgia in comparison to other places in the SEC. For instance, at Georgia for many years now, one infraction with the marijuana issue would have gotten you a one-game suspension, whereas in most places in the SEC, that's not necessarily the case. So I think if you're Kirby Smart here, you're doing two things. A lot of the mainstream media is going to paint this as, well, obviously Kirby Smart wants to do everything he can to get Natrez Patrick on the football field. I partially agree with you here a little bit. I don't know that Kirby Smart's going to do everything that he can to get Patrick on the field, but I do think that he wants to do everything he can to, as in slyly a manner as possible, alter what has been the long-standing position at Georgia because, A, from a recruiting standpoint, you don't want it to appear that you're coming down too hard on these players, and you don't want all your business to unfold in the media here. You know, every time that Kirby Smart's been asked about an issue like this year, he sort of pivoted back to all these matters are handled internally. All these matters are handled internally. Handling things internally under the previous administration in Georgia was very difficult to do because everything became public because it became a suspension. I think Kirby Smart wants to change the policy at Georgia more than he wants to make Natrez Patrick available at the Rose Bowl because this is not the kind of player that I think swings the balance of this game from a win or a loss one way or another all that much.
I agree. This is something Kirby can almost make a stand on, at the same time not put his team at risk of losing the game. You know, you can kind of ride both sides of the line if you're Kirby Smart. And again, I approach it from the, if I'm the teammate here, do I want this guy playing with me? Can I count on him to not mess up in the future? I mean, if you win the game in Pasadena and you are going to the national championship in Atlanta, and this guy's from Atlanta, do you want him being around all that as well leading up into a national championship game? I think right now the best thing for Natrez Patrick is to get away from the football team right now and figure out what's wrong with Natrez Patrick. If it's one infraction, fine. We've talked to Georgia about that a lot of times about their policy, but 3-4 times, possible probation violation, something else is wrong here.
Joel Anthony Dean says, oh yeah, BA, let the recruits know they can do whatever they want. LOL, that's logical. Here's the thing though. We believe that everyone in this country is entitled to due process. And I know y'all going to think I'm just a Georgia homer for saying this, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. We do believe that everyone's entitled to due process. What Natrez Patrick's doing here is not some sort of special class of status that's only reserved for elite SEC caliber athletes. This guy hired a lawyer, and the lawyer got his charges dropped in Winder Barrow, and now he's trying to fight the situation in Athens, which, by the way, for the solicitor in Clark County to even reveal that Natrez Patrick had, failed a test according to them. I mean, there is some dispute about whether or not it was even legal for him to reveal that publicly here. So all Natrez Patrick is doing is making available himself the same legal protections that everybody else would enjoy here. And who could sort of fight his right to do that?
I wouldn't fault him at all for that. I think that's his right. I think though, if you're a part of the Georgia program, though, you have to look at this from a different perspective. What can be proven in a court of law? What can he be arrested for? And what is actually going on with the guy's life? Because I look at it and think, you know what? Whatever can be dropped, whatever the lawyer pulled, strings, whatever was right or wrong about things being leaked. This is about the guy in a drug problem. He knows the rules. He knows he shouldn't be smoking marijuana, and yet, 3 or 4 times now, this has popped up into this guy's life. So I think that if I'm Kirby Smart, I'm being really careful with how I approach it. Yes, we don't want this to be played out in the public. We want people to understand that we're taking care of this kid. But you also have to look at it from what's wrong with the kid and why does he continue to go down this road.
But would you agree, though, and this is my final point on this, that you do have the issue of maybe Patrick does have a problem. If he does, I hope he gets treatment. And I do think that's more important than him playing in the Rose Bowl. I really do. But sort of parallel to that, he does have a right to defend himself. He does have a right to face his accuser. He does have a right to present his own evidence and know the evidence that's had against him. And that's what he's doing here with his lawyer. So the people that paint him in some sort of negative light because he's simply using the same legal process that a lot of other folks would use, that part of this I don't think there's any disputing in, that Patrick's got a right to argue this out in court and use a lawyer the way that he's using it.
Listen, I completely agree. And that happened multiple times while I was at Alabama. That the crazy things happen. You get, we had a guy arrested, I mentioned on this show before, he got shoved in the back and fell on the ground during a fight and got arrested for fighting. And it was like, let's let due process go. And before you know it, the next morning this is stringing across the ESPN bottom line that this guy had been arrested, and it's like, for what? So, let due process play out. But I think that at some point you have to quit giving this guy the benefit of the doubt inside of this program and say, you know what, after 4 times involved with marijuana, something else is at play here.
Absolutely. I will talk more about this throughout the program, including your comments in the comment section. Good to have you with us here today on AT&T SEC Country Live. Let me move on here to item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And, you know, we started Thursday's show, our final show of last week, talking about how important the official visit for Matt Corral to Florida was going to be for Florida's 2018 recruiting classes. As it turns out, that a visit doesn't take place.
Seems like that was a month ago.
Yeah, it seems like that was yeah, right. And in the SEC time frame, that seems like 1,000 years ago. That visit for Corral to Florida never happens. Really, not that long after we'd gone off the air on Thursday, Corral ends up committing to Ole Miss. Florida acts quickly by having its own visit this week with current Ohio State commit and 4-star quarterback, another guy from the state of Georgia, Emory Jones from Heard County. And, you know, there's a lot of chatter here about exactly what went on for Jones when he was at Gainesville this weekend and kind of what this means. I thought that Zach Albalverde kind of laid this out in an interesting way at SECCountry.com. I'm going to read you a few sentences here because I think it gives you, kind of the wide range of everything that happened. Zach writes at SEC Country. He, meaning Emory Jones, arrived in Gainesville after 2 p.m. on Friday, went out to eat with the coaches that night. Jones received a full campus tour Saturday, ate lunch in the indoor practice facility. After resting in his hotel, Jones checked at the football stadium and tried on uniforms in the locker room. Zach goes on to write, Jones's mother, Trina Jones, left Florida around 7:30 p.m. Saturday, took a car service to Tallahassee for his official visit to Florida State. Florida made an effort to keep Jones in town until Sunday, but he'd scheduled the Florida State trip earlier in the week and did not want to back out of those plans. So here you have it, and by the way, we can actually show you a little bit of video that was up on social media of Emory Jones getting a chance to try on the blue and orange there of the Florida Gators. Emory Jones putting that on his own Instagram account there. I'm sure a lot of Florida fans are going to think that he looks pretty good in the blue and orange. And he's obviously a high-caliber quarterback. Been an Ohio State commit for quite some time, although there's also been plenty of rumors that he might be shopping around looking for a new home, including for a while Alabama, although it would appear that ship has sailed. The bottom line here for me is this. Over the last several hours, there have been many 24/7 sports crystal balls coming in from recruiting reporters all around the country picking Jones to end up at Florida. Yep. Is this a bullet dodge for Dan Mullen after maybe mishandling the Matt Corral situation? I believe that's what Mullen did. Maybe mishandling the Corral situation to kind of land here on a recruit like Emory Jones that at Florida, he didn't start recruiting until literally the 11th hour.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a bullet dodged. If they're able to land Emory Jones, this is he's shooting back. He's doing some good things if he's able to land Emory Jones. And maybe this was in the back of his head all along. Maybe, Matt Corral's father comes out and says, you know what, he was committed to Florida, but Florida wasn't committed to him. And I thought that had a lot to do with the Justin Fields saga, but maybe this Emory Jones thing was kind of tucked in the back of, all along. He lands in Florida at the Gainesville airport, then everybody's like, oh, he's in Gainesville. So I think if they're able to land Emory Jones, I think it's perfect. And to me, Dan Mullen has the perfect pitch for Emory Jones. Hey, you know what? You can go to Ohio State, you can go to Alabama. There's going to be quarterbacks. You can come here and I will hand you the keys to the car at Florida right now if you're Emory Jones in Florida. I think it makes a perfect marriage for them too.
Be careful with the handing the keys to the car analogy.
What's that?
Be careful with the handing the keys to the car analogy. And recruiting, sometimes people take that the wrong way.
Touche.
Bo Molinaro in the comment section says that he thinks it's Matrix-style bullet dodging from Dan Mullen at Florida. And I have a tendency to kind of agree with that because the idea that this was all about a part of Dan Mullen's master plan the entire time was to sort of swoop in and contact Emory Jones here. We have quotes from Jones only a few days ago that Florida had not reached out to him whatsoever. He said he'd like to go visit Florida, but he said then that Florida hadn't reached out to him. I'm going to take Emory Jones at his word on that, and it may work out really well for Florida, but you have to call this lucky. It is lucky if you end up landing a quarterback like Jones, on the heels of letting Matt Corral kind of get away. And if you weren't interested in recruiting Matt Corral, then why don't you fly all the way across California to sort of do an in-home visit with him?
I agree with that. To me, Dan Mullen had some sort of plan. I refuse to believe that Dan Mullen was sitting there with Felipe Franks as basically the only possible quarterback on his roster and no other recruits in sight and just said, you know what, we're going to let Matt Corral kind of walk out of this because he doesn't feel wanted here at Florida. I think that Dan Mullen looked at the situation and thought, man, Matt Corral would be nice to have here because we don't really have anybody else, but he's not the guy that's going to fit our system in the long run. So maybe he started reaching out and making other calls. And I'm not saying that it happened in advance. I mean, you had the quote from Emory Jones, a week ago, right after Dan Mullen gets the job, and he's saying, I haven't been contacted by them. I have a hard time believing a guy like Dan Mullen didn't have some sort of backup plan for when Matt Corral exited. He wasn't recruiting Matt Corral that hard in the end.
I will admit, when I first heard that Florida had tried to keep him on campus without letting him get away to Tallahassee, obviously as any program would do, I thought initially it probably wasn't a great sign for Florida that Jones was going to take that visit to Florida State, because they can obviously make a pretty strong pitch here as well as the Willie Taggart administration gets started down there in Tallahassee. But apparently the online chatter is a little different here, that it does look like Florida and Jones are trending. This thing could be over on Tuesday or Wednesday, and if Florida does win, no matter how you got here, whether it was more calculated or more sort of haphazard, depending on your frame of reference here and your viewpoint, if Florida ends up with Emory Jones, that's a pretty big win for this 2018 class.
Oh, it's not even just for this class. This, to me, is a big win for Dan Mullen moving forward, and trying to implement his system at Florida. I mean, Dan Mullen, to me, was a good hire. It was a great hire for Florida. I think they fit well together. The only question I had was, would he be able to get somebody down there and run a system? I think Emory Jones answers that question on Tuesday or Wednesday. And it is crazy to me still that we're talking about, December 20th, Tuesday or Wednesday, just tomorrow or the next day, this early signing period that all these guys are going to start signing on the dotted line. But if he does, in turn, go to Florida, and Dan Mullen does land him after this entire Justin Fields, Matt Corral saga, and ends up with a quarterback like Emory Jones that you can play for the next 4 years, I think it's a home run.
Greg Steele asked a fair question. How come there weren't any colleges out west recruiting Corral? Now, we do know at one point in time, this is going back a couple years ago, he was a USC commit, but I understand what Greg's point of view here is. For a while, all we've heard about is Corral wanted to come to the SEC. He said so at the Nike opening himself, that he wanted to come play for in the SEC, wore the Georgia gear for a while, connected to Alabama briefly. So this is a guy who said himself he wanted to come to the SEC, but there is a degree to which, and that it's not entirely obvious, that maybe other programs prioritized other quarterbacks ahead of Matt Corral for reasons different than just styles of play.
Yeah, it's the way he plays the game, and it's the style of which you're playing in the SEC. I can't answer that for Matt Corral. I don't know why he wanted to come all the way across the country and play football, but the only answer I can have is it is the SEC, and it is maybe the ACC if you're Florida State.
But this is a guy that transferred high schools at one point.
Right. It's a guy, to me, who's trying to get out of Dodge right now and come play with among the best college football players in the country. I think you can go to Pac-12. You're going to put up a ton of numbers. You're going to do the same thing in the Big 12, especially as a quarterback. But to me, if you're trying to get to the next level, come play in the SEC or the ACC, and I think that opens up some doors.
We're going to get Mark Burnett here. We'll talk some Alabama Crimson Tide with him in just a couple of moments here on AT&T SEC Country Live. And Alabama players actually said a pretty interesting thing. We'll talk to Mark about this here coming up in just a second. Let me finish off with a couple more thoughts on Emory Jones before we get there, and what happens if he does land in this Florida class. I think one of the issues that you have here that's obviously not a perfect scenario, when Matt Corral, for better or for worse, is in Florida's class, it had commits from Jamar Chase, who's a pretty impressive four-star wide receiver. Chase not coming to Florida now. There is still a chance, I guess, that Florida could still get in there with Jacob Copeland, the wide receiver from your hometown of Pensacola. But Copeland officially visits Tennessee this weekend. He's been kind of strongly connected to Alabama. Does Emory Jones come in too late to be like what a lot of quarterbacks are, which are kind of coattail guys and Pied Pipers for recruiting classes? If you only get Emory Jones here just under the gun before the early signing period begins on Wednesday, does Jones' ability to attract other talent to your program become diminished?
I wish I could give you a straight answer to that. I think we're entering in uncharted territory when it talks about this signing day and this December 20th period, to where I'm not sure how many people are Florida targeting that are going to sign in February. How many guys are still going to take official visits? So much left to be played out in terms of how we're going to envision this signing period kind of coming together. I don't even think the people at Florida know. I think the coaches around the SEC probably have an idea of how this is going to go, and we're going to try to get as many people signed as we can in the early signing period. But getting Emory Jones can do nothing but help, in my opinion. So I don't know if it comes later, if it comes early, but to me, this will be felt throughout the program.
Let me move on here to item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. I actually want to bring in Mark Burnett, who covers the Alabama Crimson Tide for SECCountry.com, to talk about this. Mark, before I say let me show you a quote from Levi Wallace, an Alabama cornerback here, in talking about the situation in Alabama. He says that we're seen as the villain right now. I'm sure a lot of people don't like Alabama because we're always so good each and every year. That's something Coach Saban has instilled in us, trying to be the best we can be, just being the University of Alabama. Whatever you guys say we are, that's what we are, but we're definitely the bad guys in college football. And Mark, if you don't mind, let me ask you this. How much of that viewpoint do you think does permeate through the Alabama locker room player mindset? They kind of do go into this playoff knowing that there's a large portion of America that would like to, for whatever reason, see the Crimson Tide lose.
Oh, I think it plays a big part. I mean, Minka Fitzpatrick also said that he thinks that a lot of people just don't like Alabama. And I think you saw that once Alabama was announced as the 4 seed. A lot of strong reaction from people outside of the Alabama nation in terms of not wanting the Crimson Tide to get into the college football playoff. And somehow Alabama, who was #1 all year, we heard Nick Saban talk about the rat poison. They've also had this sort of us against the world mentality. So it's been a really weird year with the chatter around this team and how they've sort of perceived it.
Mark, I have my own ideas about that, but in your opinion, why is it that Alabama is viewed that way? Is it Nick Saban? Is it the championships they've won? Is it the personality of the fan base? What can you point at to why you feel like a lot of people look at Alabama's program that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhat Alabama fatigue. You look at it all around sports, whether it's the New England Patriots, the New York Yankees, now the Golden State Warriors in the NBA. If you have one team that's consistently in the championship or competing for championships every single year, which Alabama has done since 2008, every single year since 2008 outside of the 2010 team where they had 3 losses, Alabama has been in the hunt for the national championship. They haven't obviously won it every year, but the fact that they've been there and people see Nick Saban sort of as this dictator. They don't necessarily see a lot of the personality that he shows at times. So I think it's a combination of things. When you have a team that's winning or consistently near or at the top, people sort of get tired of that. People want to see other teams. That's why you see a lot of people were excited when Clemson won last year. A lot of people are bigging up Oklahoma now. So I think it's just a situation where people just want to see someone else win.
Mark, let me bring in Mike on this because, when you win the national championship in 2009, that was obviously a relatively new thing in terms of the college football landscape. Alabama had not won one since the early 90s. So it must be a little weird for you now to think people are tired of Alabama and grown fatigued about it because I would imagine from a media standpoint, y'all dealt with none of that because it had been such a long time since Alabama had been on top of the mountain in college football.
It had been 17 years since Alabama had gotten to that point, and I'm almost glad in a way that I left after that year. It would have been nice to have an extra ring, but trying to climb back to the top of the mountain would have probably been harder than getting there in the first place. And so I think there is a lot of that. We talk about fatigue. We talk about how Alabama is viewed not just within the SEC, but really throughout the country. We talk about Big Ten teams and Ohio State being left out and other things like that.
Mark, in the comment section, Cliff Nelson, who's a big LSU fan, said part of the fatigue about Alabama is the fact they didn't deserve to be in the college football playoff. How much of that is still going on in Tuscaloosa in terms of Alabama fans or people close to the program arguing the credentials for the Crimson Tide, or has it simply all turned in terms of attention towards the Sugar Bowl against Clemson? Are we still having the debate about whether or not Alabama is supposed to be in here?
Yeah, I think the only people still having that debate are butthurt fans for other programs. I mean, it's kind of weird. I mean, Alabama's in at this point. I mean, the committee's already made a decision. There's really nothing else to debate. I mean, it's not like the committee's going to go back and be like, well, enough fans tweeted about it or put it on Facebook, so let's change our minds. So Alabama's in. They're locked in, and they're looking forward to getting this second opportunity in terms of sort of a new life after they lost to Auburn, and also getting another shot at Clemson, who beat them in a national championship. So I just think it's one of those situations where people need to move on, and the games are going to be played on January 1, whether or not we all like it or not.
Let me finish with this. One of the things that my partner said for a while is, from an Alabama perspective, he would have almost rather seen the team in Pasadena as opposed to New Orleans because Sugar Bowl venue's not been great to Alabama in the past. Is there something to connect some of that together of maybe why New Orleans, the town, has been tough on Alabama in some of these games? Or is that just sort of random happenstance in your mind?
Well, I think it's more random because, I mean, if you look at it, they beat LSU for the national championship down there in New Orleans, which was a good time. And then they, obviously lost the Sugar Bowl to Oklahoma, A.J. McCarron's last year, and then the Ohio State game. So it's one of those situations where it's probably more random. Now, if they lose this game to Clemson, I'm sure more people will start talking about that. But I can't really put my finger on it. I don't know if, maybe people hang out on Bourbon Street a little bit too long or what. But I can't really put my finger on why that's been the case.
Hey, Mark, it's always fun to have you in the program. By the way, Cliff Nelson wanted to remind you Alabama didn't win the SEC West this year. So that's the argument they're going to make in response to that.
Thank you, Cliff.
We appreciate your time on the show. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Well, it's funny because Alabama actually got a week off to recruit and then another week to get healthy. So maybe they win there.
Well said, Mark. Well said. That is so true. It's like, Alabama does get that extra week of resting, and you get that extra time to recruit, in which, Georgia and Auburn were obviously focused in on trying to play each other, so it all works out for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Saban's sitting on the couch the next day with Brenton Cox, a five-star defensive lineman from Georgia. He's watching the college football playoff reveal. So it is crazy how it worked out. And I think the problem for a lot of people, too, is that they feel like Bama got the benefit of the doubt back in 2011 when they did go down to New Orleans and win that national title. And, listen, Ohio State got that benefit of the doubt last year, and it just happened to come back to Alabama this year.
AT&T's proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, AT&T Entertainment Your Way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless Direct TV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. By the way, that's Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. My name is Brandon Adams. It's great to have you with us in the program. Let's move on to item number 4 here on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And this happened at the end of last week, but we didn't have a chance to talk about it on our show because it happened Thursday night moving into Friday. But so help me, this is one of the most bizarre statements I've heard anybody make going into a bowl game, and I think it completely changes the tone of the Peach Bowl. I'm talking about Adrian Killins here, who's a UCF running back, one of the opponents for the Auburn Tigers in the Peach Bowl right here in Atlanta, where we do the show from each and every day. And he was asked about the speed needed to deal with the Auburn Tigers. At that point in time, Killins kind of took the conversation in a direction I don't think most people would have expected him to take it. Here's Adrian Killins, the UCF running back.
Almost definitely. SEC football, they don't have a lot of speed, honestly. So Auburn hasn't seen any speed like we have here. So I would say they're in for a rude awakening because UCF football, we're UCF fast and UCF fierce. So defense, we put 11 hats to the ball, fast and furious, and offense, we got a lot of guys who can go up and get the ball and make you miss and make big plays.
Does this clown not have the internet? I mean, I'm not even an Auburn fan. This makes me mad. Listen, y'all know me. I'm the farthest thing from an Auburn fan. But what kind of mockery of the sport is this? Him saying that Auburn has not seen anything like, what do you call it? UCF fast? Is that what he called it?
I don't know.
UCF fierce? I mean, is this the first interview he's done all year long?
I feel like he accidentally got the Big Ten and the SEC mixed up. He's like, oh, they're just big lumbering defenses. They will be able to run around them. But that's the Big Ten to me. That's not the SEC. I don't know what he's talking about, honestly. I've looked at it from a couple of different angles. Is he just trying to pick a fight? Is he trying to get up under their skin? Is he trying to, kind of put it out there like Joe Namath style to where, we're going to win this game? I have nothing. I'm not sure what he's talking about when he talks about Auburn speed, when he talks about UCF speed. UCF's a good team, but he's just dismissing anything that Auburn's done this year.
Let me show you what Booger McFarland said about this on Twitter, giving the warning. I think we would all probably agree is, absolutely the issue here. Booger says UCF says Auburn hasn't seen speed like they have. Is it a wink emoji? Is that what you call that? Is that a double wink emoji there? That may be the case, but I doubt it. Bama, LSU, A&M are all fast. What about Georgia, by the way? But nonetheless, be careful poking the bear, Booger McFarland says. And that's so true. If I'm Scott Frost, who could be working full-time at Nebraska, getting that career started, stuck around in Orlando for one more game, only have it ruined by Adrian Killins, who motivated Auburn here for a game that otherwise I don't think you'd give a rip about. Auburn would not care about this game at all if you didn't have this knucklehead talking about how they haven't seen speed like UCF's going to bring to the table. All of a sudden now Auburn's going to be motivated to play.
Yeah, knucklehead's a good word. And I think that's what you see when you see a team, a Power 5 team, go against a Group of 5 team. Sometimes they're indifferent about it. Sometimes they're showing up and they're going, you know what, we lost the SEC championship game. We didn't get in the playoff. This game is what it is. We'll go over there and have a good time. It'll be fun to kind of, have this kind of victory lap for what our season's been, and we'll move on to next year. And now it's like this guy has created this target. He's created this target on the UCF team that Auburn's like, you know what, we need to go handle business. And aside from that, I think it's a big game for Auburn. When you look at the outlook of their team, to me, this team doesn't scream 10-4. This team should not be 10-4. So I think it's a big game when you look at it from that perspective. But he has created a way bigger target on his team than it needed to be.
Drew Miller says smack talk is whack talk. An opposing team eats it up and spits it back in their face. Not wise. When a team that's as good as Auburn is on the other end of that, receiving end of that, I think they probably do. And I do think for Auburn, going back, you said sometimes it's power team against a Group of 5 team, maybe the Power 5 teams, not ready to show up. It's also Auburn going back to Atlanta for the second consecutive game. I think that hurts the vibe here. There's very little juice about the venue because you've already been there. This is an Auburn team that, think about it, its last 2 games. It was an Iron Bowl for all the marbles. All the marbles. An SEC championship game for a college football playoff spot after that. and now this Peach Bowl game where you really have nothing at stake. And listen, I like the Peach Bowl. I've been to a number of them, but there is nothing on the line here for Auburn. But all of a sudden now, what does it take to kind of go through the rigors of practice? Adrian Killen saying this dumb thing is probably enough for Auburn here. I mean, honestly, I'll take Auburn by 1,000 here.
That's definitely a way to look at it. To me, I kind of approach it from the aspect, and I think Marcus Spears said this the other day. If you needed this to kind of get motivated for the game, then you probably shouldn't be playing the game.
Oh, come on, that's not
But
fair.
like I was going to say, yeah. I disagree with that. I think that when it comes to bowl games, now this, if any other game, I might agree with them.
Yeah.
If it's during the season, if you needed trash talk to get ready for the Iron Bowl or ready for the SEC championship game, then yes, that's probably a good point. But when it comes to these bowl games, especially a Group of 5 team against a Power 5 team, then I think you're doing them a huge disservice by bringing something like this up.
All right, let's move on. Item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Line, 1st and 10. So early in the show, we talked about Florida not getting its official visit with Matt Corral, but maybe getting a very good quarterback in Emory Jones, currently an Ohio State commit. Corral doesn't make it to Gainesville because on Thursday night he committed to Ohio State, making it official on his own Twitter feed here. You'll see the uniform for Corral and the committed sign there. He is going to be signing officially when early signing period begins on December 20th. And, I think that Corral is such a big win for Ole Miss here, who had every reason in the world to be deflated after I think it settled on Matt Luke as a coach. I think this is no better than a C+ hire. Obviously facing the bowl ban, which it really did nothing against the NCAA to fight back on. It essentially rolled over and took whatever the NCAA wanted to dish out, including I think a pretty curious situation involving Leo Lewis. Lost the Egg Bowl regular season finale to Mississippi State. A lot of reasons for low morale here in Oxford. But to get a Matt Corral, who at one point in time was, talking about the biggest and best of SEC schools, now going to Ole Miss, I think this is a big win here for the Rebels. I don't know what it means for him on the field because I don't know how much he's going to have around him. But they got a pretty good-looking quarterback there.
Well, I will, correct you. They did win the Egg Bowl at the end of the year. Nick Fitzgerald gets hurt in the Egg Bowl.
Excuse me, I don't know why. Yeah, sorry.
Ole Miss is able to pull that one off. Yeah. So this, to me, but to add on your point, I think this is steamroll in the right direction. It's like, Matt Luke got the job after the Egg Bowl. Everybody's feeling good about it. I don't know who you turn to if it's not Matt Luke. All of a sudden, Matt Corral shows up, and guess what? You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. If you're an Ole Miss fan, to me, and we talked about this a little bit last week, the possibility of this happened. To me, this is the light at the end of the tunnel. This is you seeing the future of your program beyond everything that's happened for the last couple of years, beyond the sanctions, beyond the bowl bans, beyond the scholarship limits, beyond the Hugh Freeze fiasco. This, to me, Matt Corral being able to sign early with Ole Miss and get into this program, to me, is that tiny light at the end of the tunnel that Ole Miss fans can point to and say, you know what, we're building towards something way out there. And I don't know what Matt Corral's future will, I don't know what it holds. I don't know what kind of offense they'll be running. Obviously, Jordan Ta'amu in this offense has been great. Shea Patterson moves on. But I'm just saying, this one guy signing on the dotted line, to me, signifies an entirely new era for Ole Miss.
Jamie Bailey says it says more about Florida that he chose Ole Miss than the other way around. And, Jamie, that may be true. And I'm going to disagree with you. Even though I misspoke about Ole Miss winning the Egg Bowl, I got to make sure I can give him credit for that. They did win that game. But you're way higher on Luke as the coach than I am, because I think hiring a guy on the basis of winning just one rivalry game, that is wishful thinking of the highest order here. And so, Matt Corral makes you feel a little bit better about the Ole Miss situation. But it's not necessarily an endorsement to me for Luke as much as it is, hey, things are not as bad as they could be. I mean, ultimately, I agree with Jamie here in the comment section that Corral lands at Ole Miss because of whatever happened at Florida, either for the good or for the bad, than some sort of mega attraction to Ole Miss.
Oh, that's possible. Definitely something went wrong at Florida. He wanted to go to Florida, but. Listen, Ole Miss wasn't this guy's only other scholarship offer. This guy had, scholarship offers from who knows how many other schools. So he had options out there. This wasn't like his fallback plan. He wanted to be at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss wanted him. And I think where you and I disagree on the whole Matt Luke saga is, I don't think this is a home run hire. I don't think it's a 5-star recruit for Ole Miss getting Matt Luke to stay on as their head coach. But where else do they turn? This to me is kind of, I don't know what head coach they'd gone out and gotten besides Matt Luke. To me, a guy that loves Ole Miss, a guy that played at Ole Miss, has been a part of that program for years. You give him the keys to the car. I know you warned me about saying that.
But it's okay to give the coach the car. You don't give the recruit the car. People get the wrong impression when you say, hey, give the recruit the keys to the car. People get the wrong impression about that.
Totally different situation. But you give him the keys to the car, see what he can do for the next year. Drive this car out of this bowl ban, out of scholarship limitations, and if it doesn't work out, guess what? Turn around and hire another coach. When there's not 6 other schools in the SEC trying to find a coach, Matt Luke can hold on to this program for another year.
I feel like this is the time of year when a lot of sort of short-term couplings are born out of some Christmas parties and some sort of, I feel like the Luke thing at Ole Miss is very much the same way. Hey, everybody's happy, the music's all playing, confetti's coming down from the rafters because you beat the Mississippi State Bulldogs. All of a sudden, you sort of cuddle up next to somebody that you don't want to be with the rest of your life.
Musical chairs, man.
That's sort of a long, way to go for an analogy. But I sort of feel like that's what Luke and Ole Miss are. Right?
It's probably true. And listen, I'm not saying this guy is a national championship caliber coach. I just don't know what other direction Ole Miss would have turned. And for to buy yourself a year, to buy your program a year, to get out from a year when everybody's trying to hire a new coach, to get him to the other side of 2018, I think Matt Luke was the right guy.
All right, let me move on here to item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So obviously Georgia's got its preparations going for the Rose Bowl here. It'll play Oklahoma for a spot in the college football playoff, but it's also potentially knocking on the door of what could be, now not expected to be, but what could be the nation's #1 overall class by the time the recruiting cycle is done here for 2018. It starts this past weekend as many as 7 5-star prospects on campus for Georgia. Last chance to impress before the official early signing period begins on Wednesday. All indications are Georgia's able to do that. Let me run through quickly here a few of the reactions on social media. Let me start with Brenton Cox, who you mentioned earlier in the show. The composite 5-star from Stockbridge, Georgia, has officially said it's Alabama or Georgia for his services. That's going to go down on December 20th. He was in Athens this past weekend. Thought was that went well. Also true for Cade Mays here. A couple photos from Mays floating around. That's Mays from his Instagram with the Georgia jersey on. Mays, obviously the 5-star prospect from Knoxville, Tennessee. Another photo that got put out there by Owen Condon, a Georgia commit, was Mays with 4 other big offensive linemen, including the 5-star Jamari Sawyer, Trey Hill, Owen Condon, already UGA commits, along with Warren Erickson. That's potentially the offensive line of the future. You could talk about Justin Fields, who also visited Georgia this week, saying now he is officially going to sign early. That's going to happen at noon Eastern time on Wednesday. That's good news for Georgia. Add to that, I guess, Jamari Sawyer, one of the offensive linemen pictured a moment ago, the 5-star, who now is also going to commit and sign on the 20th. He's expected to go to Georgia as well. Is that all the recruits? Have I updated all of that? One more to give you here. Also, another 5-star that was on hand was Micah Parsons, who's been rumored connected to a lot of different schools, including his own in-state school, Penn State. But he was one of the 5-stars that visits Georgia this past weekend. And he says, I swear to God, every time I visit one of these schools, my head is spinning. To give you an idea of just how much work Georgia was doing on the recruiting trail. I had Chip Towers on my show, Dog Nation Daily, this morning. I asked him what he thinks about the work that Kirby Smart's doing as a recruiter right now. Chip, who's seen a lot of Georgia coaches in his time covering the Dogs for DogNation.com, says that he thinks that what Kirby's doing right now at Georgia is potentially pretty special. Here's Chip Towers.
It's great for Georgia, but with everything they have going on. I mean, there was already considerable, recruiting momentum coming out of going into 2017 and coming out of the season, but then you add the college football playoffs on top of it, and man, it's just, Kirby is, nobody knows better how to manage that than he does, coming from Alabama, and there's just a lot to be really excited about right now. It's a kind of a perfect storm of the good variety, and and it sounds like Georgia's going to get to the finish line with possibly one of their best classes ever.
Yeah, listen, if you ask me, this is going to sound crazy. What should Georgia fans be more excited about? The current placement in the Rose Bowl or the future of Georgia from a recruiting standpoint? I think the future is actually brighter than the present, even though Georgia's only 2 games away from winning the national championship, because you know this as well as anybody because you saw this play out right in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
When you bring in more talent than the teams that you're playing, you are going to win more games than the teams that are trying to beat you. It's the recipe that Alabama used. Most teams can't marshal those resources the way that Nick Saban can in Alabama. Kirby Smart at Georgia could, and right now they are.
Yeah, listen, I go back to, I think it was May, maybe we had this conversation, and all these recruits are starting to show interest in Georgia.
Yeah.
You were getting a couple of commits, and you had a couple guys out there, the 5-stars that were like, I kind of like Georgia, I kind of like this other school. And the answer I kind of gave back then was, Kirby Smart, these recruits are feeling it out. They're kind of, I think Kirby Smart's going to do good things at Georgia, but, can we see it out on the field this year? And listen, as the wins started to pile up, as you're able to go beat Notre Dame, as you're able to beat Auburn in the SEC championship game, more and more recruits start to believe in what you're doing. Kirby Smart, he doesn't have to sell the future anymore. He can sell the present, and he can sell the fact that he's got his team in a place to win a national title. And I think that's as big as anything. When you talk about the recruiting database in the state of Georgia, when you talk about that footprint being spread out amongst the Southeast, the product on the field is helping him as much as anything.
Joel Anthony Dean actually asked a really good question in the comment section. He says, hey, but wasn't Mark Richt signing these same kind of class when he was at Georgia? And the answer is no, although at first blush it may not seem that different. Richt was a fixture in the top 10, but you're talking about an average class finished somewhere around 8, which means about 11 or 12 4- and 5-star players. Kirby Smart last year number 3. This year I think he's going to finish no worse than number 2. You're talking about a total number of like 19 or 20 4- and 5-star players, which is an NFL caliber body in each of these 2 classes. That's almost double the elite talent per year than what Richt was bringing in, and that extra talent makes a big difference. It goes from being, the kind of team that wins 10 games and just misses out on the SEC championship, the kind of team that goes 11-1 and makes the college football playoff.
Yeah, and listen, how many times do we have to say this year? And I'm not a Georgia guy by any means, and he does enough for the Georgia talking, for all of us in the room. But how many times do we have to say this? This is not a Mark Richt Georgia team. This is not. I'm so tired of fans that are like, Georgia always gets their hopes up and they always, fold in the end. And maybe they won't win the national title this year. I don't know if they will. I don't know if they're my favorite. But the point is, this is not a Mark Richt Georgia. This is a Kirby Smart Georgia, and this is a new era, and they're recruiting at a high level, and they're winning. So try to poke the holes you want to. But this is a different era right now for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Shane McCullough asked about Arkansas. We're actually going to talk about the Razorbacks a little later in the program, including their pursuit of a big-name 4-star quarterback. We'll do that with you coming up here in just a moment here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Let me remind you, though, right now, that's Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. It's great to have you with us on the program. I will remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let me move on here to item number 7, and you already know, if you watch the show every day, you know where I'm going to be on this topic because I've hammered this for a while here. I thought that Joan Neese from SI.com wrote one of the dumbest things I've seen written.
I'm glad you said it and I didn't have to, because that was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen.
Oh, so you agree with
yes,
this?
Yes,
okay, so because you've been more negative, Jimbo Fisher.
I'll go into that. I thought that the reasons were going to be different, but you can go ahead and continue.
So let me just give you the quote before we start bashing it, so that y'all can see what we're on. So what Joan writes is that, and I know this is a dumb thing to even be mad about, but SI. Before I read the quote, let me explain the quote. SI was ranking the coaching hires in college football on like a 5-point system, and Jimbo Fisher only got 2.4 points in the
second to last, right in front of
second to last. So like one of the worst in all college football, according to Joan Neeson. What Neeson writes is, I'm going to read this to you now after that fairly long setup. Kevin Sumlin became a star in his early years in College Station because of Johnny Manziel, before settling into a frustrating routine of 8-win finishes. And there's no Johnny football in the wings for Fisher. Can he retool the program and recruit the rest with the rest of A&M's rivals? Sure. It's just hard to see a major jump happening right away. 2.4 out of 5, the grade from Joan Neeson. I mean, Jimbo Fisher is a sitting national championship coach. There are like 4 or 5 of those in the whole world right now. If you get one, it's got to be a good hire, right? I mean, isn't it as simple as that?
I thought that when I read this piece, and I saw the grade, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I can go down this road. Maybe I can kind of piggyback off what Joe Neeson's doing here. And I thought it would be, Jimbo, did some good stuff. He was kind of handed, this Bobby Bowden program, and they were kind of up and down in spots. They lost 6 games this year. And I thought, okay, I can kind of ride with that. I can kind of piggyback that. I'm not sure I agree with all that, but I can kind of see where you're coming from. She gave the execution of Texas A&M a 2 out of 5. She gave the instant impact a 2 out of 5, and the splash impact a 3 out of 5. And I just, for the life of me, I don't know why you can give a 2 out of 5 for the execution of what Texas A&M did.
Yeah.
Texas A&M circled the coach, said, we're going to pay you all the money you want, and you're going to come here and coach our football team, and we're not listening to anybody else or talking to anybody else. And they got a 2 out of 5 for the execution. That blows my mind. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
The execution alone is 5.
Did Joan Neeson graduate from Texas? That was the first thing that popped in my head. I could not believe that we're sitting here giving this 2 out of 5 stars.
But here's the real thing you got to realize about Texas A&M. And I know Bo Molinari's in our comment section. He's an Aggies fan. He'll like this. Some of y'all may not. It wasn't that long ago that A&M was pulling top 10 classes under Kevin Sumlin. So this idea that Texas A&M has to wait a long time for Jimbo Fisher to sort of build something at Texas A&M, there's actually a decent amount of talent already on the roster and a pipeline towards that talent in place at Texas A&M. You know, you saw Kirby Smart go 8-5 in year 1 at Georgia and 11-1 at year 2, you know, with the Dogs. I'm not telling you that Jimbo Fisher does the same thing at Texas A&M. I'm also not telling you it's an impossibility. There couldn't be a dramatic turnaround at Texas A&M when you utilize the talent that's already in place with what you can bring in over the course of a couple quick recruiting cycles. It could happen that fast for Texas A&M, especially with what I view as less than stable situations right now at places like Auburn and LSU. Not bad programs, but just somewhat unstable programs. I could see Texas A&M taking advantage of that and becoming, as I've said now a million times, the chief competitor to Nick Saban in the SEC West.
Yeah, and another part of the article I had a ton of problems with. It was like, you know, Tom Herman's recruiting at such a high level that I don't know that Jimbo will ever. What are you talking about? What has Tom Herman done that makes you think that Texas is just killing Texas A&M right now? I haven't seen anything out of Texas that tells me that they're the program they once were, you know, 10 years ago. And so everything about that, I was dumbfounded. I really was when I read it, and I was sitting there going down the list of names, and just the list of names ahead of Jimbo Fisher is mind-blowing. The South Alabama coach, Matt Luke, got 3.6. Josh Heupel got 3.6. Dan Mullen got 3.8. And these, to me, those were low grades as well. But then when you go down to what Jimbo Fisher got, I thought it was unbelievable.
So let me run through some comments here. Jeremy Pettis says the head coach cannot recruit and make as many visits as the assistant coaches can, correct? Yes, that is true. It's another reason why you like the idea of these experienced coaches who know how to build those organizations, the structure needed to kind of go out and do some of this kind of stuff. Dwayne Funkhauser says Texas A&M wins 8 games next year. Jamie Bailey talked about his time at Florida State, says lost starting quarterback, barely won 6 games, Jimbo is trash. It may be true that A&M only wins 8 games this next year, but, you know, to act like because of one bad season at Florida State that somehow proves that Jimbo Fisher is not a good coach. I realize for whatever reason a lot of y'all don't like Jimbo Fisher, and I'm not going to speak to that, you know, positive, negative, one way or the other. But if you look at the overall track record at Florida State, if you had to hire a coach, it'd be hard-pressed to do much better than Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, that's to me, and listen, I'm one of the people that's not, I don't rank it as a 5-star. You know, I'm kind of like 4.5, you know, 4 on the grading scale. I don't know if this is the home run a lot of people think. I think that Jimbo Fisher a lot of times had speed in Tallahassee that maybe he won't be able to get in Texas A&M. It's going to be an uphill climb for him to get the same type of speed he had on those offenses. But anybody who's saying he's trash, I don't understand that at all. I mean, he's got a national champion in his back pocket. You mentioned it. There's only, maybe 4 sitting head coaches that have national championships right now. To call him trash, I don't know where we're coming up with that. He's a good football coach. Now, will he be successful at Texas A&M? We'll figure that out another day, but let's not. Trash to me is a little bit ridiculous.
There may only be the 3, right? You got Saban, you got Meyer, you got Jimbo, you got Dabble. That's 4 right there.
Well, at the places that they won the national title too. I mean, that narrows it down to 3. So I don't even.
I mean, when Miles left LSU, that was like
Bob Stoops left.
Yeah, Bob Stoops left. That's like, you know, 2 of the 6 before. That's like, you know, a significant percentage of the guys that won national championships were just sort of struck off the board just like that.
Yeah, Steve Spurrier left college football. That was another national title. I mean, listen, again, I'm not saying the guy goes in and wins a national title next year, but to say that it's a bad hire and for her to come out and give it 2+ stars to me is laughable. You got to give this guy his due credit that he's a good football coach, and you know that if he has the right players in place, then he can get it done.
Logan Westerman says he's going to snap right in at Texas A&M and the existing program. He's basically the same style as some, he's just much better. I sort of agree with Logan on that, and I don't want to turn this into the Jimbo Fisher show, but I believe that if I was a program looking for a coach, he's the best coach that could have been hired this offseason.
Yeah.
Better than Dan Mullen, better than Chip Kelly. I mean, Jimbo Fisher would have been my first choice of anybody.
Yeah, I agree with you. There will be different fits and different people that are good in Texas and different people that are going to be part of the Texas A&M fan base. I think when you look at Chip Kelly, he probably went where he needed to be, West Coast guy. When you look at Dan Mullen, going back to Gainesville was the right move for Florida and Dan Mullen. And Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, to me, were perfect. The Texas A&M wasn't the best job opening, but it was the perfect job opening for Jimbo Fisher.
All right, let me move on here to item number 8 on our AT&T SEC Country Live, 1st and 10 list. I thought that Kevin Skarbinski from AL.com had a pretty interesting column where he unearthed a little fact here, according to his sources, about Auburn coach Gus Malzahn. According to Skarbinski, Malzahn was concerned about the Alabama game for a different reason. People close to him say he was convinced a 4th straight loss to Crimson Tide would have cost him his job. In other words, he thought he would get fired if Auburn had lost to Alabama this season. Do you think that would have happened, first of all?
It would have been a strong case for it. And we touched on this all year, didn't we? That at some point, Gus Malzahn had to beat his rivals. He had to beat Georgia, who he'd lost to 3 times in a row, and he had to beat Alabama, who he'd lost to 3 times in a row. And so for him to be able to circle back around and beat both those teams in the fashion he did at home, I think signified the fact that he was the right guy for the job, in my opinion. And we've talked about it on and off the show at times all year that Gus Malzahn continued to grow in the right direction, in my opinion. It would have been hard-pressed for me to say that, he loses to Alabama, the #1 team in the country at the time, and he gets fired for that. But I definitely think there was an avenue for that. And I think there's a section of Auburn fans that felt the same way, that, if he had lost to Alabama again, if the Arkansas job comes calling, you know what, you can go ahead and go take it because we're looking in a different direction. You just can't lose that many times in a row to your arch rivals and expect to keep your job. And I think the reason that he did keep his job and get that extension that he did is because he did beat both those teams.
Yeah, so I think that you may be right. I think that was, to a certain degree, a must-win game for him. But it actually brings up for me a different question. I want you to hear some audio. We played this the other day on AT&T SEC Country Live of Gus Malzahn talking about what he thinks the future looks like for Auburn. How much do Auburn fans believe him, though, when he says this, given what Skarbinski wrote at AL.com? Here's Malzahn, then we'll talk about it.
Talk about the future and how bright the future is and everything kind of coming together right now with the foundation that we have with our talent. We have depth. We're recruiting extremely well again, and I said this before the year that the next 3 or 4 years I feel like are going to be our best years, at least since I've been at Auburn, and I believe that more today than I even did, the first year. So I feel very good about where we're at moving forward.
Erica Russell's an Auburn fan in the comments section, says we do believe it. We believe what Gus Malzahn says right there. But, if I'm going to sort of criticize Ole Miss for hiring Matt Luke on the basis of just one game, am I going to criticize Auburn here as well for maintaining its relationship with Gus Malzahn on the basis of just one Iron Bowl? Now, beating Alabama is a pretty big deal when you're that's your in-state rival. I do get that. I think Auburn probably made the only decision that it could make in terms of holding on to Gus Malzahn. I just think that the relationship here between Malzahn and his employer is not made all that much stronger by just one Iron Bowl win. I think things look pretty good for right now, but these are threads that could be worn through here pretty quickly, I believe.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Gus Malzahn's getting a new AD. They're going to move in a different direction, obviously, at Auburn, and he's got this money in his back pocket. I think 7 years, $49 million was the extension, but I don't think it was just the Iron Bowl. I think the Georgia game was kind of included in that, and the fact that they were both #1 teams in the country when they came into Jordan-Hare, and he's able to knock both of them off. To me, I don't know how you could have gone another direction. And listen, it's kind of how I feel about the whole Jimbo Fisher hiring at Texas A&M. We can poke holes in his resume all we want to. We can poke holes in, what is he with this? What is he without Jameis Winston? What is he, without, Jarrett Stidham at quarterback this year if he didn't find Jarrett Stidham? But what is he with it? And I think that's when you start to kind of circle the wagons. If Gus Malzahn gets his players, then he can go out and beat Alabama, he can go out and beat Georgia. Now, he did turn around and lose to Georgia in the SEC Championship game, so yes, that leaves you with a lot more questions. But I think that there's so many more things in the positive direction with both of those coaches than there ever could be in the negative column right now.
Will Ward says the question is, since Malzahn got a new 7-year deal worth $49 million, will he win against elite teams away from the 3-3-4? That's the area code there in Lee County, Alabama. He says Arkansas and Missouri don't count, and I do think that's a really good question. And I think that those kinds of unanswered questions are one of the reasons why I believe if things don't go well for a Malzahn, including as soon as 2018, it's going to be really easy for the negativity kind of sort of be churned back up again. I think that Malzahn had a really good season, and I think if Jarrett Stidham comes back, and it sounds like he's probably going to, Auburn could be in position for another good season next year. But boy, it's not going to take much for a lot of Auburn fans to say, what have we gotten ourselves into with this gigantic extension for a coach that we don't like any more than we thought we did 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, and listen, where's Cam Petway going to be? Where's Kerryon Johnson going to be next year? And those games that we're talking about, that we're hyping up, the Georgia game and the Alabama game in Jordan-Hare Stadium, where you shocked the country and beat 2 #1s in a row, neither one of those teams are getting worse, and they're both headed back to the other towns next year. So you're going to be playing in Athens, Georgia, and you're going to be playing in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. What is Gus Malzahn going to do then? Can he go on the road and get those big wins? I think it's a very fair question.
And the last question for me on this, too, is, Kevin Steele, who was a finalist for the Tennessee job. Chip Lindsey, who's very upwardly mobile. He wants to be a head coach. Do we like Malzahn in Auburn simply because of what he's been able to do with Kevin Steele and Chip Lindsey? What happens if those guys are gone? We quoted Justin Ferguson from SEC Country last week, who said that Kevin Steele saved Gus Malzahn's job.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, I don't want to pay $7 million a year or $49 million worth of a long-term contract to a guy who got his job saved by a defensive coordinator that's probably not going to be here another year or two.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's fair, and I think it's fair to question Gus Malzahn. I've done it a million times on the show. But the fact of the matter is to me that Auburn couldn't go in another direction. I think their hands were tied. I don't think you let Gus Malzahn, a guy who just beat two number one teams in the country, walk out the door and go to Arkansas. I don't think it's possible. I think you pay him what you need to pay him, and you address it later. I've mentioned it about the Ole Miss job. There was 6 openings. You're going to go up against Florida State. You're going to go up against Florida. You're going to go up against Texas A&M. A lot of people with a lot of big pocketbooks. I don't think that Auburn could have allowed. I think the look would have been a lot worse if they allowed him to walk out the door.
Drew Miller says on topic number 9, he says Arkansas really needs some kind of good news. They've been hurting for a while, so let's see if we can give it to him here. Item number 9, our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list involves the quarterback, the in-state guy, Jerry Bohannon. He's a 4-star prospect, and recently he told some reporters that he's pretty impressed with what Chad Morris is kind of doing in terms of being a fit for the Razorbacks here. Obviously, Morris, a respected offensive mind. Here's what Bohannon had to say.
He came by school actually today, so I saw him today. I feel like that's the right man for the job. I feel like he's going to really change the program around with the right guys. I really believe in him. I believe in him.
So Bohannon believes that Chad Morris is the right guy for the job. Recently, Trent Shaded, who covers Arkansas recruiting for SECCountry.com, also wrote that right now, if he were to make his pick, he says, if I was forced to bet one way or the other, I'd feel very confident that he, that's Jerry Bohannon, the 4-star prospect we just talked about, will sign with the Razorbacks. And when you think about a guy like Chad Morris, who is respected as a lead offensive mind, did great work at Clemson, was a Broyles Award finalist there, gone on to be, while the overall win-loss record not that impressive at SMU, the offensive performance has been pretty good. You pair that guy with the 4-star quarterback, I think that's a pretty good marriage.
I agree, and they're having to make up ground from what Brett Bielema was doing. I mean, I think, from everybody that we've read, Brett Bielema kind of viewed him as maybe an outside linebacker early on in the process, and it wasn't until, when we got into the spring last year that all of a sudden it's like, hey, this guy can play quarterback. Now, Baylor's going to be out there. You're going to see Memphis out there. He's from 30 miles away from Memphis, but I think this is a huge deal for Chad Morris in Arkansas. I think getting this guy on campus and kind of moving to the next level in your program, because Arkansas has been that lumbering team, the big offensive line, trying to run the ball with these running backs, kind of a spread smash kind of concept under Brett Bielema, where you have a lot of wide receivers, but you still run the ball. Being able to move on from that style of offense and start to get Chad Morris's keys in place, I think it's a huge deal. I put it right up there with Emory Jones going to Florida.
I was going to say the same thing.
I think it feels a lot like the same type of situation.
I think that Emory Jones is probably more of a finished product as a quarterback in comparison to Jerry Bohannon. But at Arkansas, you got to sort of build from something. And in terms of Chad Morris' ability to sort of train someone, bring someone as a quarterback, I think he's got a great chance to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's also about the outlook on Chad Morris too. And he's a guy. Was it Billy Farrell that committed there yesterday, the defensive tackle from up there? So I think that he's building something. I think Arkansas fans can start to look at this program and say, you know what, we're not staying even anymore. We're not going down anymore. We're starting to build towards something at least, and you start to see that path start to open up.
Let's do item number 10 here on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. We'll go away from football to basketball here for a moment, at least briefly. Tell me if you think this is going to become a trend. You see what Quay Green, the Kentucky player against Virginia Tech, does on Saturday? He wears some protective goggles here, but it's like a tinted shade. It's almost like sunglasses. I don't know if this is the only angle we have on this. This is the only angle we have on this for Green here. You think this catches on? I mean, it's actually kind of a cool look, the idea of wearing the shades on the basketball court. I feel like that's kind of a nice look.
Yeah, it's like the shaded rec specs, and it kind of meets like RoboCop somewhere in there. Yeah, like kind of like a Terminator thing going on.
This guy looks like he was sent from the future to pull 10 rebounds and score 14 points.
Yeah, like the old school like baseball players with the Oakley M frames. Like that's
it is a little like that, right?
That's what I feel like. I don't know. I don't see it as a trend. I don't know that rec specs will ever be a trend. I think that you have guys that wear masks sometimes, like Kyrie Irving, and you have guys that have to wear rec specs. To me, it's a good look for him, but I think he's the only kind of guy at a place like Kentucky that can kind of put it together.
I think that looks pretty smooth with the Kentucky blue uniform. I think that looks pretty cool. You may see some more guys doing this in the years ahead. All right, we got a Christmas-related champion of life. We'll give that to you here coming up in just a moment. Before that, let's do our AT&T look ahead. Of course, AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. And don't forget, we're looking ahead to Wednesday, which is the start. And Wednesday is going to be the big deal. It's going to be a lot like the traditional National Signing Day event in February. A lot of that's going down this Wednesday, but the period for signing letters of intent is still open on Thursday and Friday of this week. So from December 20th to the 22nd, we have the early signing period. You know, for me, I'm not a fan of it at all. I think it hurts the SEC more than it hurts other leagues. I think trying to cram this in right before Christmas is a major pain, a major headache. I'm not a fan of the event really whatsoever.
Yeah, I flip back and forth on it because I think, you know, the guys that are like legacy players, the guys that have been committed for a year, the guys that want to just enjoy Christmas with their family, they can get it knocked out. I think what you've seen is that's what it was intended for. The guys who, you know, have been committed forever, know where they're going to school, get it knocked out, you can deal with spring semester. I think what it's turned into, because obviously coaches are going to go the extra mile, it's turned into, you know, we got to get these guys all signed. We've got to hurry up, and, you know, we can't let anybody get out ahead of us. So it's turned it into an extra factor that probably shouldn't have been there. It was well-meaning. So I've looked back and forth on it, but we're going to see how it all plays out. I can't wait to see what the end game really is.
Yeah, I think there was a fantasy on the part of some of the mid-level programs. This would reduce the competition of signing day. But this is the fuel that builds champions. The SEC is not going to be less competitive about stuff like that.
I agree. I agree. And to me, you know, when they did this, they should have eliminated official visits before this happened. I think if you eliminate official visits all the way up to December 20th and get them all done after, then all of a sudden everybody's taking a little more time.
We close out the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life, and today it's holiday themed. Thought that Vaught Hemingway Stadium looked really cool the other day, and Ole Miss does a great job of capturing this on video, turning the whole place into almost like a winter wonderland of Christmas lights. And, well, check it out for yourself. So this is in the stadium here. And the music's being, you know, added in after the fact. But kind of turn this into sort of a choreographed Christmas deal here. You see the snowflakes there on the big scoreboard there. I gotta tell you, I'm a huge fan of Christmas. Like, Mike, you gotta understand something. I'm like the biggest like Griswold Christmas guy in the world.
Got the inflatables in the front yard.
So, you know, Ole Miss wishing us all a happy holidays with that. I'm gonna allow that. I think that's pretty nice.
I'm on board with it. Somebody did say earlier on Twitter, it's amazing what athletic departments can do when they don't have bowls to prepare for.
That's pretty funny, actually.
I thought that was pretty
But why
funny.
are you going to do that?
I didn't say it. I can't take
Merry
credit for it.
Christmas, and you're over here ripping into
I
them?
can't take credit for it. It is what it is.
That's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. Thanks for being with us on the program today. Check out our podcast on iTunes. It'll be up for you right after the show. Also, share this show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every afternoon here on AT&T SEC Country Live. We're back tomorrow at 3 p.m., getting closer to the start of signing period, which begins on Wednesday. We'll see you then right here on AT&T SEC Country Live.